Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the true heir to the League of Assassins. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain fell in endless, gray sheets, a miserable curtain that separated the world from the sterile white of the doctor's office. For 6-year-old Izuku Midoriya, the world had just ended. It hadn't ended with a bang, like the explosions from his favorite hero's fights, but with a quiet, clinical pronouncement that had sucked all the color from his life. "I'm sorry, kid. It's not going to happen." The words echoed in the small room, colder than the X-ray of his foot glowing on the light box. The doctor, a man with glasses that seemed too large for his face, pointed a pen at the single joint in Izuku's pinky toe. "You see, by this age, quirk individuals have evolved past this vestigial joint. Izuku, he has too. In this day and age, it's exceptionally rare. He's quirkless." Izuku's hand, which had been clutching his battered All Might action figure so tightly the hero's plastic smile was digging into his palm, went limp. The toy fell to the tiled floor with a hollow clatter that sounded like a gavel falling on his dreams. Quirkless. The word was an abyss. A void. It meant no super strength. No pyrokinesis. No telepathy. It meant he was a relic, an anomaly left behind by evolution. It meant he could never, ever be a hero like All Might. The drive home was a blur of smeared city lights and the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers, each sweep a whisper of "it's not going to happen, not going to happen." His mother, Inko, kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, her own face pale and her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her worry was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket, but beneath it, Izuku could sense something else. A deep, resonant fear that had nothing to do with his quirkless status and everything to do with what it might mean for their quiet, simple life. Later that night, the storm still raging outside, Izuku sat in his computer chair, bathed in the heroic glow of the monitor. He watched the video over and over, All Might's debut, a disaster scene, smoke and fire, and then that booming laugh. He carried a dozen people on his back, his grin a beacon of absolute certainty. "Fear not!" the digital hero roared. "For I am here!" Tears that Izuku hadn't even realized he was holding back began to trace hot paths down his cheeks. He turned the chair slowly to face his mother, who stood silhouetted in the doorway. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, his voice a choked, desperate squeak. "Mom, can I be a hero too?" Inko's face crumpled. She rushed forward, wrapping him in her arms and burying her face in his hair. Sobs racked her body. "I'm sorry, Izuku! I'm so sorry!" Her words were meant to comfort, to apologize for a fate she couldn't change. But to Izuku, they were a confirmation. The final nail in the coffin of his dream. He didn't know then that her apology was for something far more profound. She wasn't just sorry that he was quirkless. She was sorry because his quirklessness made him a target. It made him a beacon for a world she had risked everything to escape. A world that did not value smiles and saviors, but power and perfection. A week passed in a haze of quiet grief. Then, one evening, as the rain began to fall once more, there was a knock on their apartment door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the clipped knock of a delivery person. It was a slow, deliberate series of 3 knocks, resonating with an ancient authority that made the very air in their small home grow still and heavy. Inko froze, a plate slipping from her soapy hands and shattering in the sink. The color drained from her face, replaced by a ghostly pallor Izuku had never seen before. "Mom?" he asked, his own small heart starting to pound. "Izuku," she whispered, her voice tight and strained. "Go to your room. Lock the door. And do not make a sound, do you understand?" But he was frozen, transfixed by the sheer terror in his mother's eyes. The knock came again, louder this time, each impact a pronouncement of doom. Inko took a shuddering breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked to the door as if she were walking to her own execution. When she opened it, the man standing there seemed to command the entire hallway. He was tall and regal, with a bearing that spoke of centuries of command. He wore a simple but elegant green and gold robe, and his face, framed by a sharply pointed goatee, was a mask of aristocratic calm. But it was his eyes that held Izuku captive. They were green, a startling, piercing emerald, and they seemed to hold the wisdom and cruelty of ages. They radiated a power that had nothing to do with a quirk. It was the power of a king, Talia, the man said. His voice was not loud, but it filled their apartment, smooth as silk and hard as steel. Inko, Talia, bowed her head slightly. Father, she breathed, the name a confession and a surrender. The man's ancient eyes flickered past her, landing on Izuku. The boy felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure, as if his entire being was being weighed, measured, and analyzed in an instant. The man stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing them in. So, this is the boy, he said, his gaze never leaving Izuku. You fled my world to raise him in this cacophony of mediocrity. You gave up your birthright for this. He deserved a normal life, Inko said, her voice regaining a sliver of defiance. The man let out a soft, mirthless chuckle. There is nothing normal about the blood that flows in his veins. Our blood. He walked slowly toward Izuku, his footsteps silent on the floor. He knelt, not in supplication, but as a predator lowering itself to meet its prey's eye level. I have heard the news, child. The world has branded you quirkless. A flaw. An imperfection. Izuku flinched, the words still a fresh wound. They are fools, the man continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. These quirks are a fever that has afflicted humanity. A chaotic blight that breeds weakness and reliance on random chance. True power, the power that shapes civilizations, does not come from a genetic lottery. It comes from here, he said, tapping his own temple, and from a body honed into a perfect weapon. He looked at Izuku, truly looked at him, and for the first time since the diagnosis, Izuku felt seen not as a broken thing, but as something of immense potential. I am Raz Al Ghul, the man declared. And you, my grandson, are not flawed. You are pure. Unburdened by the genetic chaos that chains the rest of this world. Your mother tried to hide you, to give you a life of insignificance. I will offer you a destiny. He extended a hand. It was a hand that had likely ended thousands of lives, that had shaped the course of history from the shadows. I will teach you to be stronger than any hero, faster than any villain. I will give you the tools to carve your own name into the annals of history. I will make you my heir. All you must do is take my hand. Izuku looked from the outstretched hand to his mother's terrified face, then back to the piercing emerald eyes of the man who claimed to be his grandfather. He thought of the doctor's pitying look. He thought of his classmates who would soon mock him. He thought of his shattered dream. Raz Al Ghul wasn't offering to make him a hero. He was offering to make him strong, and to a 6-year-old boy whose world had just been defined by his weakness, the offer was irresistible. Slowly, his small hand reached out and grasped his grandfather's. The grip was firm, a binding contract. Inko let out a choked sob, the sound of a final, lost battle. Raz Al Ghul smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant thing. The training will begin at once. 9 years later, Izuku Midoriya stood before the towering gates of UA High School. The sun was bright, casting long shadows across the courtyard, and the air buzzed with the nervous, excited energy of hundreds of prospective students. Cherry blossom petals drifted on the breeze, a gentle pink snow against the hard, futuristic lines of the school building. It was a picture of hope and promise. Izuku felt none of it. To him, the excited chatter was a low-level tactical hum, the crowd a series of potential obstacles and assets. His posture was deceptively relaxed, a calm stillness in a sea of fidgeting teenagers. His green eyes, once wide with boyish wonder, were now sharp, analytical instruments, constantly scanning, cataloging, assessing. He still had a notebook, but it was no longer filled with fawning sketches of heroes. It was filled with cold, precise data, observed quirks, fighting styles, and meticulously detailed weaknesses. His mission brief, delivered by his grandfather a month prior in the frigid air of Nanda Parbat, was clear. Objective: infiltrate UA High, the premier hero institution. Primary target: All Might. Analyze his methods, his power, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. Secondary objective: assess the next generation of heroes. Identify their strengths, exploit their weaknesses. Report your findings. Do not form attachments. Do not deviate from the mission. Out of my way, Deku! The voice, a familiar gravelly bark, cut through his thoughts. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, his hands jammed in his pockets, a thunderous scowl on his face. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't even stumble. He simply adjusted his balance with an almost imperceptible shift of his weight, his eyes calmly meeting Bakugo's fiery red glare. For a moment, Bakugo was thrown off balance. He was used to the flinching, the terrified squeaks, the cowering. He saw none of it. All he saw was a level, unnerving calm in the eyes of the boy he tormented for a decade. This wasn't the useless, crying Deku he knew. Still trying to play hero, you quirkless wannabe? Bakugo sneered, trying to regain his footing. You'll be lucky to last 5 minutes. Izuku's expression didn't change. His internal analysis was automatic, a reflex honed by years of brutal training. Target, Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk, explosion. Utilizes nitroglycerin-like sweat. High offense, low defense. Volatile, predictable, easily provoked. Primary weakness, ego. Secondary weakness, over-reliance on quirk leads to predictable attack patterns. He offered no reply. Silence was a far more effective weapon against a personality like Bakugo's. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and walked past him toward the auditorium, leaving a fuming, utterly confused Bakugo in his wake. Inside, the briefing from President Mike was a cacophony of noise and light that Izuku found grating. He tuned out the boisterous persona, focusing only on the tactical data being presented. 3 types of robots, 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. A 4th, a 0-point obstacle. Large-scale urban replica arenas. 10-minute time limit. He processed it, cross-referenced it with the schematics of the arenas he had memorized last night, and formulated 3 separate strategies before President Mike had even finished his sentence. When the massive gates of Battle Center B slid open, most students hesitated, confused by the lack of a countdown. What are you waiting for? President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The real world doesn't have a starting gun. Go, go, go! As the crowd surged forward, Izuku was already gone. He moved not with a burst of quirk-fueled speed, but with the fluid, silent grace of a predator. He melted into the alleys of the mock city, his feet making no sound on the pavement. He was a ghost in a green tracksuit. The first robot, a 1-pointer, swiveled its single red eye toward him, its machine guns spinning up. Other students would have met it head-on, with a blast of energy, or a feat of strength. Izuku saw it not as a monster, but as a machine with flaws. He slid low, the volley of rubber bullets whistling over his head. In his hands were 2 reinforced, weighted tonfas he'd retrieved from hidden pockets in his tracksuit. He didn't strike the robot's armored chassis. He vaulted off a dumpster, using the momentum to spin in midair, and brought the blunted end of a tonfa down with pinpoint accuracy on the hydraulic joint of the machine's leg. There was a crunch of protesting metal, and the leg buckled. As the robot tilted, off balance, Izuku was already moving. He ran up its chassis, leaped, and drove the pointed end of his other tonfa deep into the bundle of wiring at the base of its neck. The robot sparked violently and collapsed, its red eye fading to black. Total time elapsed, 4 seconds. Energy expended minimal. He moved on. For the next 8 minutes, he was a phantom of efficiency. He never fought fair. He used the environment, striking from shadows, using debris as a distraction. He saw a group of 3 2-pointers bearing down on another examinee, a girl with purple hair and earphone jacks dangling from her lobes. He didn't denounce himself. From a rooftop above, he threw 3 small, razor-sharp discs. They weren't designed to destroy, but to disable. They embedded themselves perfectly in the optical sensors of each robot. Blinded, the machines began firing wildly, crashing into each other. Izuku dropped down behind them, a blur of motion, and disabled their power couplings in seconds. The girl stared, wide-eyed, at the spot where he had been, but he was already gone. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was accruing points with maximum efficiency. But his training demanded situational awareness. He saw a boy with spiky red hair about to be crushed by a falling 3-pointer he just disabled. Raz's voice echoed in his mind, cold and absolute. Let the weak perish. It is the natural order. Do not compromise your position for another. But another voice, a fainter one from a life he barely remembered, a voice that sounded like All Might, whispered, "A hero saves people." He threw a smoke pellet. The area was instantly shrouded in thick gray smoke. Under its cover, he fired a high-tensile wire from a wrist-mounted device. It wrapped around the falling robot, and using a crumbling wall as an anchor, he redirected its fall by a crucial 5 feet. It crashed to the ground, missing the red-haired boy by inches. By the time the smoke cleared, Izuku was 3 blocks away, a rescue point added to his tally. He justified it with cold logic. A panicking student is a liability on the battlefield. Removing the liability was a sound tactical decision. The lie was thin, and he knew it. He had amassed 45 points. A safe, respectable score. Not high enough to draw undue attention, but enough to pass. His mission parameters dictated he should now find a secure location and simply wait out the clock. Then the ground began to shake. A shadow fell over the entire city block, a moving eclipse that blotted out the sun. From behind a skyscraper, the 0-pointer rose. It was a titan of chrome and steel, a 100-meter-tall monstrosity that made the surrounding buildings look like toys. Its single, colossal red eye glowed with malevolent energy. Panic erupted. The other students, who had been fighting with bravado just moments before, turned and fled. Their quirks were useless against something of this scale. "It's the 0-pointer! Run! It's impossible! Just get away!" This was the correct tactical response. The obstacle was worth no points. Engaging it was a pointless risk. Izuku's mind, honed by years of League doctrine, agreed. Observe. Analyze. Survive. He turned to find a discreet escape route. That's when he heard it. A small cry of pain. He turned back. Near the behemoth's path, a girl with a brown bob haircut and rosy cheeks was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete. It was the same girl he'd seen earlier, the one who had been so kind and wished him good luck before the exam started. Ochako Uraraka. She struggled, her face a mask of terror as the giant robot bore down on her, its massive foot lifting to take another earth-shattering step. She was going to be crushed. The 2 voices in his head went to war. "She is irrelevant," snarled the voice of his grandfather, the demon's head. "Her fate is a consequence of her own weakness. The world is defined by the strong who survive and the weak who are culled. This is your most important lesson. Do not interfere." But the other voice, the ghost of a 6-year-old boy who cried in front of a computer screen, screamed back. "You can't just leave her. A hero saves everyone. Even if there's nothing to gain, that's what makes them a hero." He looked at the girl's terrified face. He looked at the unstoppable machine. He saw not an asset, not a liability, not a stranger. He saw a person who was going to die if he did nothing. And in that split second, 9 years of ruthless, brutal indoctrination shattered against a single, innate impulse. To hell with the mission. He broke into a dead sprint, not away from the danger, but directly toward it. The other fleeing students stared at him as if he were insane. "What is that idiot doing? He's quirkless. He's going to get himself killed." Izuku didn't hear them. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The armor plating on the chassis was too thick for any of his tools. The joints were too high and well protected. Direct assault was impossible. But every machine, no matter how large, had a weakness. A power source. A control system. His eyes scanned the metallic titan, not as a monster, but as a complex system. He saw it. Along its spine, protected by armor but accessible via external maintenance conduits, was a thick bundle of power cables leading from the reactor in its chest to the processing unit in its head. A long shot. No, an impossible shot. But it was the only one he had. He fired his grappling line. The hook bit into a seam of armor plating 50 feet up the robot's back. He engaged the high-speed winch, rocketing up the side of the machine as it lumbered forward. He ran up its back, a tiny green flea on the height of a leviathan, dodging a clumsy swat from one of its gigantic arms. He reached the maintenance panel he'd spotted. It was sealed shut. Cursing, he jammed the pointed end of his tonfa into the seam, using all his strength and body weight to pry it open with a hideous shriek of stressed metal. Sparks flew as the panel ripped open, exposing the pulsating, energy-filled cables beneath. The main conduit was as thick as his arm. He had one weapon left suitable for the task. From a sheath on his back, he drew a single, perfectly balanced combat knife. Forged in the fires of Nanda Parbat, its edge was monomolecularly sharp. It was a tool for killing, not for demolition. He had one chance. He planted his feet, judged the sway of the machine, the wind, the tensile strength of the cable. He took a breath, letting it out slowly, his entire world narrowing to the knife in his hand and the target a few feet away. Then he threw it, not with brute force, but with a flick of the wrist, a flawless spinning technique designed to maximize penetration. The knife flew through the air, a silver streak, and struck the main power conduit dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a massive surge of blue energy erupted from the wound. The robot shuddered violently, a deafening electronic scream tearing from its speakers. Its giant red eye flickered. The lights across its body died, and with a final, grinding groan of dying machinery, the Titan slumped forward, utterly lifeless. Izuku was already rappelling down. He landed in a silent crouch beside Uraraka just as the colossal machine collapsed behind them, shaking the very foundations of the city. He didn't look back. He jammed the end of his tonfa under the slab of concrete pinning her leg, found the perfect point of leverage, and with a sharp grunt, lifted it just enough for her to pull free. He stood up, offering her a hand. His face was a mask of professional calm, betraying none of the internal war he had just waged. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice steady. Uraraka stared at him, her eyes wide with awe, shock, and something else. Gratitude. I think so, she stammered, wincing as she put weight on her leg. Just then, the deafeningly loud buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku simply nodded, his duty done. He turned and walked away without another word, melting back into the alleys as other students began to creep back, staring at the fallen giant and the small, quirkless boy who had brought it down. A week later, a single, unassuming envelope arrived at his small, Spartan apartment. The room was bare, the walls empty save for a calendar. The colorful All Might posters and merchandise of his childhood were long gone, replaced by a pull-up bar, a meditation mat, and a collection of training weapons meticulously maintained on a simple rack. He sat Caesar-style on the floor and calmly opened the seal. A small metal disc fell out. When he placed it on the table, it flickered to life, projecting a three-dimensional image of All Might. "I am here! A projection!" the hero boomed. Izuku's face remained impassive. "Young man, you may have passed the written exam with flying colors, but in the practical, you scored a grand total of 0 villain points." A video feed played, showing Izuku disabling robots but never destroying them in a way the points system registered. "Normally, that would mean a failing grade," All Might continued, his grin unwavering. "But that was not the only way to pass this test." He gestured dramatically, and the screen changed to show another angle. It showed Izuku diverting the falling robot. It showed him disabling the 3 robots attacking the girl with the earphone jacks. And then it showed the final, stunning sequence, his impossible takedown of the 0-pointer to save young Uraraka. As the projection spoke, Izuku's mind drifted to a different voice, one he'd heard in a secure debriefing room. A calm, cheerful, an infinitely more dangerous voice belonging to Principal Niza. "His performance is an anomaly," the principal's voiceover seemed to say, a memory of a faculty meeting Izuku could only imagine. "He scored 0 villain points, yet a staggering 70 rescue points, the highest score in over a decade. He never once used a quirk, yet his combat efficiency, his tactical awareness, and his movement were flawless. The footage from the practical exam, it reads less like a prospective student and more like a veteran special operative. Midoriya Izuku is not what he seems. He is an enigma we must watch very, very closely." All Might's voice brought him back. "Saving others, acting for the good of those around you. That is the heart of a true hero. And so, we award rescue points. Izuku Midoriya, with 70 rescue points, you not only pass, you came in first place." The projection showed Uraraka trying to give him some of her points, a gesture that caused a strange, unfamiliar warmth to bloom in Izuku's chest. "Welcome, young Midoriya," All Might finished with a flourish. "This is your Hero Academia." The projection flickered out, leaving Izuku in the silence of his room. First place. He had drawn the maximum amount of attention to himself. A catastrophic mission failure. Yet, he felt no regret. He stood and walked to a corner of the room, kneeling beside a loose floorboard. He pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark red silk, was not a secret hero journal or a treasured memento. It was a lacquered wooden box. He opened it. Within lay 2 items. One was a single, ornate dagger, its handle wrapped in black leather, its blade bearing a faint, swirling pattern from being folded 1,000 times. The other was a heavy, golden medallion, intricately carved with the snarling visage of a demon, the seal of the League of Assassins. The mark of the demon's head. He picked up the medallion, its cold weight familiar in his palm. He had broken a direct order. He had acted on emotion. His grandfather would be displeased. But he had also succeeded. He was in. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of cold resolve. The mission was compromised, but it was not over. He was now inside the fortress. A shadow in the heart of the light, and the demon was waiting for his report. The first day of class at UA High began not with a bang, but with the intimidating groan of a ridiculously oversized door. Izuku paused before the entrance to Class 1A, his hand hovering inches from the cool metal. He could hear the low hum of conversation within, a mix of nervous energy and youthful bravado. To him, it was the sound of a theater of operations coming to life. Every voice was a potential target, every personality a variable to be catalogued. He took a calming breath, a technique taught to him in the frigid mountain air of Nanda Parbat to slow his heart rate before a kill. Here, he used it to center himself before a social interaction. He slid the door open and stepped inside. The room was a vibrant collection of the world's future elite. A boy with engines in his calves chopped his hands through the air with rigid formality. A girl who was entirely pink chattered excitedly with an invisible classmate. And seated with his feet propped disrespectfully on his desk was the one variable Izuku already knew intimately, Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo's head snapped up the moment Izuku entered. His crimson eyes widened, first in disbelief, then narrowing into slits of pure, undiluted rage. The easygoing atmosphere in his corner of the room evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension. "Deku!" he growled, the name a serrated edge. He kicked his feet off the desk and stood, his posture radiating aggression. "What the hell are you doing here? This isn't some charity for quirkless rejects." Izuku's eyes swept over him, his analysis automatic and cold. Subject's emotional state, agitated, bordering on hostile. Pulse likely elevated. Increased sweat production indicates quirk is primed for use. He is seeking a reaction. A sign of weakness. Izuku gave him none. He met Bakugo's glare with a look of placid neutrality, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing even. He offered a slight, polite bow. "Good morning, Bakugo-san. It is good to see you as well." The utter lack of fear was like a physical blow to Bakugo. For 10 years, the name Deku had been his tool, a brand he had seared into Izuku's psyche to ensure his own superiority. He expected cowering, stammering terror. This calm, detached politeness was an alien language, a complete invalidation of their entire history. It was infuriating. "Don't you dare mock me!" Bakugo snarled, tiny crackles of energy popping in his palms. "You cheated, didn't you? There's no way a worthless, quirkless nobody like you could have gotten into UA." The boy with the glasses, Tenya Ida, shot up from his seat. "That is highly inappropriate conduct for a student of UA. And you should not have your feet on the desk. It is an insult to our upperclassmen and the craftsmen who built them." Before the confrontation could escalate, a new voice cut through the tension, lazy and monotone. "If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave." Everyone turned to see a man lying on the floor by the teacher's lectern, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag like a miserable caterpillar. He slowly unzipped himself and rose to his feet, revealing a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His black hair was a mess, his eyes were bloodshot, and a strange, scarf-like capture weapon was draped around his neck. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," he said, his tired eyes sweeping across the room. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource." He took a small sip from a juice pouch. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. It's a pleasure to meet you." His gaze lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. A flicker of recognition? No, not recognition. Scrutiny. The file on the quirkless prodigy who took first place in the exam had clearly made an impression. "Right," Aizawa said, his voice devoid of any enthusiasm. "Put these on and meet me on the field." He tossed a bundle of UA gym uniforms onto his desk. The locker room was a noisy, chaotic affair that Izuku navigated with detached efficiency. He changed quickly and silently, his movements economical. His body, hidden under the loose middle school uniform, was now on display. It wasn't the bulky, muscle-bound physique of a weightlifter. It was lean and compact, a body of dense, wiry muscle, with the faint, silvery tracings of old scars crisscrossing his back and arms, souvenirs from training sessions that were more like life-or-death struggles. He ignored the curious glances and was the first one out on the field. Aizawa waited for them, his expression as sour as ever. "Today," he announced, "we're going to be conducting a quirk assessment test." A collective groan of confusion went through the class. "But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation?" Ochako Uraraka asked, her voice full of concern. "Yui isn't bound by tradition," Aizawa stated flatly. "That's how we're able to run the top hero program in the country. You heroes don't have time for pointless ceremonies." His gaze swept over them, cold and appraising. "You've been using your quirks without any real control since you were children. This test is designed to gauge your baseline potential." He looked directly at Bakugo. "Bakugo, you finished second in the entrance exam. What was your farthest softball throw in middle school?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Aizawa tossed him a softball. Bakugo strode into the designated circle, a savage grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arm back, took a deep breath, and with a thunderous roar of "Dai!" he threw the ball. It rocketed into the air, propelled by a massive explosion that left a trail of smoke in its wake. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in a chorus of amazed shouts. "Whoa, 705 meters? This looks like fun! We can use our quirks as much as we want!" "Awesome!" The word fun seemed to trigger something in Aizawa. The air grew cold. His usual tired expression sharpened into something predatory. "Fun? You think this is fun?" he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have no potential and will be immediately expelled." Panic rippled through the students. Izuku's expression, however, remained unchanged. He recognized the tactic immediately. It was a classic league stress test. Apply extreme psychological pressure to break down the subject and reveal their true capabilities and weaknesses. A logical ruse. Aizawa wasn't looking for the strongest. He was looking for those who crumbled. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with Ida. The boy with the engines crouched, his calves beginning to rumble. Izuku dropped into a low 3-point stance, a sprinter's start that was also the opening form of a deadly martial art known as the Whispering Cobra. The starting pistol fired. Ida was a blur, his recipro burst clearing the distance in 3.04 seconds. But Izuku was not far behind. He didn't just run. He exploded forward, his entire body a perfectly coiled spring. He used a parkour technique called a tic-tac, kicking off the timing sensor pole at the start line to gain an extra burst of angular momentum. His steps were silent, his arms pumping in perfect synchronicity with his stride. He crossed the line in 5.58 seconds. It was an incredible time for a quirkless human, fast enough to beat several of his quirk-using classmates. Ida looked at him, his initial arrogance replaced by a look of profound respect. "Incredible! Your starting form was flawless. You maximized your potential energy transfer with absolute efficiency." Izuku just gave a short nod. "Thank you." Next was the grip strength test. He picked up the device and focused. He didn't just squeeze, he channeled his chi, an esoteric technique taught only to the highest echelons of the league, focusing his body's energy into his hand. The muscles and tendons in his forearm hardened like steel cables. The digital reader climbed rapidly, finally stopping at 180 kilograms. The student measuring him gasped. "Whoa! Are you a gorilla? That's insane!" Izuku simply handed the device back, his face unreadable. He could have pushed it further, but 180 was the perfect number, high enough to be impressive, but not so high as to be deemed physically impossible. It was a carefully calibrated performance. He continued this pattern through each test. In the standing long jump, he cleared the entire sandbox by using a tumbling technique to convert forward momentum into upward lift. In the side-to-side steps, his movements were a fluid, untouchable blur, his center of gravity never wavering. He was a machine of perfect human conditioning. He was an enigma to his classmates. Uraraka, floating her way to an infinite score on the long jump, watched him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Ida saw appear in discipline and efficiency, someone who understood the value of fundamentals. And from across the field, a pair of mismatched eyes watched him with a cold, piercing intensity. Shoto Todoroki, son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, saw something familiar in Izuku's precise, joyless movements. It was the mark of a brutal, unforgiving upbringing. It was the look of a fellow tool, forged in fire. Finally, it was the ball throw. The climax of the assessment. The students had all posted impressive, quirk-fueled scores. Uraraka had gotten infinity by making the ball weightless. Bakugo's 705.2 meters was still the benchmark for a more conventional throw. Now, it was Izuku's turn. He walked into the circle, the soft ball feeling mundane and light in his hand. A wave of whispers followed him. "It's the quirkless kid, right? What's he gonna do? He can't use an explosion or anything, poor guy. He's definitely going to come in last." Bakugo smirked, leaning against the wall. "This'll be good. Get ready to see a big, fat 40 meters, teach." Aizawa watched, his gaze sharp and unwavering. This was the test he was most interested in. The other events could be explained away by intense physical training. But this required a burst of power. Izuku stood in the circle, his eyes closed. He ignored the whispers, the stares, the smug look on Bakugo's face. He was not on a field at UA. He was on a cliffside in the Himalayas, the wind whipping at his robes, his grandfather's voice a harsh whisper in his ear. "The body is a chain, Izuku. Every muscle, every tendon, every bone is a link. Power does not come from one link alone. It comes from the entire chain, moving as one. From the earth, through your legs, up your spine, and out through your fingertips. Master the chain, and you can shatter stone." He opened his eyes. He began to move. It started with his feet, planting themselves into the dirt, gripping the earth. He coiled his body, lowering his center of gravity. He wasn't just winding up his arm, he was winding up his entire being. The power started in his toes, traveled up his legs, torqued through his hips and torso in a perfect, explosive spiral. It flowed across his shoulder, down his arm, and into his wrist, which snapped forward at the last possible second. The entire sequence was a flawless example of kinetic linking, a transfer of energy so efficient that almost none of it was wasted. The ball left his hand not with a boom, but with a sharp crack as it broke the sound barrier for a split second. It didn't fly in a simple arc. It spun, a perfect gyroscopic spiral that cut through the air with minimal resistance, sailing farther and farther, a tiny white speck against the endless blue sky. It landed with a distant thud. The field was utterly silent. The other students stared, their jaws slack. Bakugo's smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression of stunned disbelief. Aizawa looked down at the device in his hand. His tired eyes widened slightly, the only outward sign of his shock. He held it up for the class to see. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo. By 1/10 of a meter. He had done it without a quirk, using nothing but pure, unadulterated, and terrifyingly perfect technique. The silence was broken by Bakugo. "What?" he shrieked, his voice cracking with outrage. "No way! That's impossible! He's quirkless! He must have cheated! You're lying! I saw what I saw!" Aizawa said, his voice a low growl that silenced Bakugo instantly. His eyes, however, were not on Bakugo. They were locked on Izuku. He had seen fighting styles from all over the world. He had seen assassins, special forces soldiers, and underground martial arts masters. The technique Midoriya had just used, it wasn't from any self-defense class. It was esoteric, ancient, and brutally efficient. It was the kind of technique one learns when the only passing grade is survival. Izuku walked back to the group, his expression as serene as ever, though his arm throbbed from the strain. The other students parted before him, a new kind of fear and respect in their eyes. He was no longer the poor quirkless kid. He was something else entirely. Something dangerous. With the test concluded, Aizawa displayed the final rankings on a holographic screen. Izuku Midoriya was ranked 9th. A respectable, middle-of-the-pack score. Perfectly calculated. He had shown enough skill to be credible, but not enough to seem like a freakish outlier, despite the ball throw. By the way, Aizawa said, deactivating the hologram, his voice dripping with tired sarcasm. I was lying about the expulsion. It was a logical ruse to make you push your limits. The class erupted in outrage and relief. Only a sharp, dark-haired girl with a ponytail seemed unsurprised. Of course it was a ruse, she said calmly. It wouldn't be logical to expel a student on the first day. Izuku had known it too, of course. But he remained silent, observing. His mission was to gather information, and the ruse had been incredibly effective. He now had baseline combat data on 18 of the country's most promising young heroes. And he knew their teacher was far more perceptive than he appeared. As the day concluded and the students filed out of the classroom, Izuku found himself approached by Ida and Uraraka. Midoriya-kun, Ida said, his arm chopping stiffly. Your performance today was truly inspiring. It is a testament to the power of hard work and dedication. Yeah, that was amazing. Uraraka chirped, her round face beaming. Especially the ball throw. And you saved me at the entrance exam. I never got to thank you properly. You were just gone. Izuku felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. An awkward warmth. Attachments were forbidden. But their sincerity was disarming. It was the logical thing to do, he replied, his voice even. You were in distress. Still, it was super cool, Uraraka said. She then pointed to the name on his student ID. I was wondering, your name, Izuku. The kanji can also be read as Deku, right? Izuku's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. He knew where this was going. When we were kids, Bakugo's voice cut in from behind them, dripping with malice as he shouldered his bag. I called him Deku because he was useless. A wooden doll that couldn't do anything. And he still is. He shot Izuku a look of pure loathing and stalked out of the room. Uraraka looked crestfallen. Oh. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was a mean nickname. She then brightened, a determined look on her face. But you know, to me, Deku sounds a lot like the Japanese word for you can do it. It sounds like a hero's name. It doesn't feel useless at all. Izuku looked at her, truly looked at her. Her earnest, open expression held no malice, no deception. It was a genuine attempt at kindness. His programming screamed at him to reject it, to maintain distance. But the mission parameters also dictated blending in. Adopting a nickname, even that one, was a step toward integration. Deku, he said quietly, testing the sound of it. For the first time, it didn't feel like an insult. It felt like a cover. A perfect piece of camouflage. I like it. You can call me Deku. A brilliant smile spread across Uraraka's face. For a moment, a genuine, unplanned smile almost touched Izuku's own lips. He suppressed it instantly. He bid them a polite farewell and stayed behind, packing his bag with slow, deliberate movements. He was the last to leave the classroom. Or so he thought. A word, Midoriya. Izuku turned. Shota Aizawa was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his capture weapon glowing with a faint red light that matched his eyes. His quirk, Erasure, was active. A subtle show of force. Sir? Izuku asked, his face a perfect mask of polite confusion. Cut the act, Aizawa said, his voice low and serious. I read your file. Quirkless. No prior record of specialized training. attended a perfectly average middle school. Yet, on day one, you exhibit the physical conditioning of a pro, the tactical awareness of a veteran, and martial arts techniques I've only ever seen in classified intelligence briefings. He took a step closer, his gaze pinning Izuku to the spot. The entrance exam wasn't a fluke. That ball throw wasn't a trick. That was skill that takes a lifetime of brutal, dedicated training to acquire. The kind of training a 15-year-old kid from a quiet suburban home has no business possessing. Aizawa's eyes were like scalpels, trying to peel back the layers of Izuku's carefully constructed persona. So, I'm going to ask you one time, and I want a straight answer. Where were you trained, Midoriya? This was the moment. The first true test of his infiltration. Izuku met Aizawa's gaze without flinching. His heart rate remained a steady 60 beats per minute. He had rehearsed this. He had war-gamed a dozen different versions of this exact conversation. My mother was always worried about me, Izuku began, his voice calm and measured. He pitched it with just the right amount of practiced sincerity, the tone of a boy reciting a story he's told many times. Being quirkless, it makes you a target. She enrolled me in a number of programs since I was a child. Specialized physical conditioning, self-defense courses. There are private tutors who cater to the quirkless, helping us learn to function in a world of superpowers. He let out a small, self-deprecating sigh. It wasn't easy. The training was very intense. But it was all I had. If I wanted any chance at my dream, I had to work 100 times harder than anyone else. It was a perfect lie because it was built from pieces of the truth. His training had been intense. He had worked 100 times harder. He just omitted the parts about Nanda Parbat, the League of Assassins, and the fact that the final exam for most of his courses involved fighting his instructor to the death. Aizawa stared at him for a long, heavy moment. He saw no tells. No nervous tick, no shift in his eyes, no sweat. The kid was either telling the truth, or he was one of the most accomplished liars Aizawa had ever met. His instincts screamed it was the latter. I see, Aizawa finally said, his quirk deactivating. The red glow in his eyes faded. Private tutors. The words were laced with skepticism. He straightened up, his expression unreadable. Your story is consistent. But your abilities are not. You're on my radar now, Midoriya. Every move you make, I'll be watching. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Don't give me a reason to regret my decision to let you stay. Izuku stood alone in the quiet classroom, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. He slowly shouldered his bag. The first probe had been deflected. But Aizawa was not convinced. His cover was holding, but it was fragile. He had passed the test, but in doing so, he had created a dedicated and highly skilled observer who would be watching his every move. The mission, he realized, had just become infinitely more complicated. The air in the control room was thick with anticipation. Rows of monitors displayed live feeds from every corner of Battleground Beta, a sprawling urban replica designed for UA's combat simulations. The entirety of Class 1A was gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering blue light, watching as the first teams engaged in the iconic heroes versus villains exercise. Izuku stood near the back, a silent observer in a sea of excited chatter. He wasn't watching the fights with the wide-eyed wonder of his peers. His gaze was sharp, analytical, his mind a relentless processor of information. He catalogued every move, every quirk usage, every tactical blunder. Kirishima and Zero versus Ojiro and Hagakure. Kirishima's hardening provides excellent defense, but limits his mobility. Zero's tape is versatile but has a finite tensile strength and is vulnerable to being severed. A flanking maneuver would have ended the match in under 2 minutes. Ojiro's over-reliance on his tail for offense leaves his front vulnerable to a direct assault. Hagakure's invisibility is a powerful infiltration tool, but she neglects to account for her impact on the environment, a disturbed dust mote, a footprint in spilled water. Amateurs. His analysis was cold, precise, and dismissive. It was the voice of his training, the voice of the League. But a smaller, quieter part of him couldn't help but be impressed by their spirit, their raw, unrefined passion. It was a variable his training hadn't prepared him for. And now, All Might's booming voice echoed from the front of the room, cutting through Izuku's thoughts. It is time for our next matchup. The symbol of peace, in his gleaming silver-aged costume, stood before the lottery machine. 2 large balls, one black and one white, rolled out. Team A will be the heroes, he declared, holding up the white ball. Consisting of Midoriya Izuku and Uraraka Ochako. Uraraka beamed, giving Izuku a cheerful thumbs up. Looks like we're partners, Deku-kun. Let's do our best. Izuku gave a slight, formal nod in return, his mind already shifting from analysis to strategy. Partner, Uraraka Ochako. Quirk, zero gravity. Effective on objects up to 3 tons. Contact-based activation. Can induce nausea with overuse on herself. Strengths, high mobility, excellent support, and disruption capabilities. Weaknesses, limited direct combat potential, reliance on physical contact. And they will be facing. All Might drew the black ball. Team D, the villains. Comprised of Bakugo Katsuki and Ida Tenya. A chill went through the room. The fated matchup. The explosive prodigy versus the quirkless enigma. Everyone knew the history, or at least they thought they did. They saw a bully and his former victim, a volcano about to erupt on a rabbit. Bakugo's head snapped towards Izuku, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. It was a look of pure, savage joy. This was it. The chance to put the world back in its proper order. The chance to finally break this new, unnervingly calm Deku and expose him for the worthless pebble he had always been. His palms began to smoke, not with anger, but with ecstatic anticipation. Izuku met his gaze. His expression was a placid lake, betraying nothing of the cold, calculating storm raging beneath the surface. He saw Bakugo's grin not as a threat, but as a tactical opening. Ego is a weapon. In the hands of a master, it can be turned against its owner with devastating effect. The angrier he gets, the more mistakes he will make. Now then, Team D, you may enter the building and prepare. All Might instructed. You have 5 minutes to set up. Heroes, we will discuss your strategy. As Bakugo and Ida entered the 5-story building, All Might pulled Izuku and Uraraka aside, handing them a floor plan and a small roll of white capture tape. Your objective is to either secure the nuclear weapon prop or capture both villains. All Might explained, his usual boisterous persona softening into that of a genuine teacher. Remember, this is a simulation, but you must treat it as a real-life scenario. Think carefully and work together. Uraraka was practically vibrating with nervous energy. A real bomb. Ida is so fast, and Bakugo-kun's explosions are so powerful. This is going to be tough. She looked at Izuku, expecting to see a similar level of anxiety. She saw none. His eyes were scanning the blueprints with an unnerving intensity, his fingers tracing potential routes. Deku-kun? Are you okay? She asked quietly. You're not scared of him, are you? Izuku finally looked up from the plans, his gaze meeting hers. Fear is a tool, he said, his voice low and even. It can paralyze you, or it can be used to sharpen your senses. Bakugo is counting on me to be paralyzed. He tapped a finger on the blueprint. He won't be expecting me to use it. He quickly laid out the plan. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. Bakugo's ego is the key. He will not guard the objective. He will ignore his partner. He will come for me and me alone. He sees this not as a team exercise but as a personal duel. We will exploit that. He turned to Uraraka. Ida will be guarding the weapon. He is intelligent and methodical. He will likely have cleared the room of all debris to prevent you from using your quirk on ammunition. Your role is not to fight him, but to be a diversion. A ghost. Uraraka blinked. A ghost? I will engage Bakugo on the lower floors. Izuku continued, handing her an earpiece. I will keep him occupied. While he is focused on me, you will make your way to the top floor, but do not engage Ida directly. Stay out of sight. Be a presence. A noise in the vents, a shadow in the corner. Make him second-guess every sound. Your mission is to keep him pinned, guarding the objective, and to create an opportunity. When you see it, you will act. I will handle Bakugo. There was an absolute certainty in his voice that was both terrifying and reassuring. This wasn't the plan of a nervous first-year student. It was the cold, hard strategy of a seasoned commander. Okay, Uraraka said, her own nervousness giving way to a determined resolve. I trust you, Deku-kun. All right, heroes. All Might's voice boomed over the intercom. You may begin. Izuku and Uraraka slipped into the building through a ground-floor window. The interior was a labyrinth of concrete pillars, narrow hallways, and empty rooms. Izuku moved with a silence that was unnatural, his feet making no sound on the dusty floor. Uraraka did her best to emulate him. They had barely made it 20 feet inside when a deafening explosion ripped through the air. Boom! Bakugo appeared from around a corner, rocketing towards them on a wave of concussive force, his face twisted into a mask of feral glee. Come on, DKU! Don't you dare hide from me! Izuku reacted instantly. Uraraka, go! Now! He pushed her towards a nearby stairwell just as Bakugo's right hand swung around. It wasn't a punch. It was an explosion, aimed directly at Izuku's face. Izuku didn't try to block it. He didn't try to dodge backward. He did the last thing Bakugo expected. He moved into the attack. He dropped, his body coiling like a snake, and flowed forward, under the arc of the explosion. The heat and force washed over his back, singeing the fabric of his costume, but he was unharmed. He was now inside Bakugo's guard, too close for him to safely use another large-scale blast. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock for a fraction of a second. That was all Izuku needed. He didn't throw a punch. He drove the palm of his hand into Bakugo's solar plexus. It wasn't a blow meant to injure, but to expel the air from his lungs in a single, brutal gasp. As Bakugo staggered back, wheezing, Izuku was already gone, melting into the shadows of the labyrinthine hallways. Get back here, you damn coward! Bakugo roared, his voice echoing through the building. He launched himself forward in a blind rage, explosions propelling him recklessly down the corridor. From the observation room, the other students watched in stunned silence. Whoa, he dodged that! Kirishima exclaimed. Midoriya's movements, they're so precise. Noted Momo Yayorozu, her analytical mind struggling to process what she was seeing. All Might gripped the console, his ever-present smile strained. Young Midoriya's reaction time is beyond that of a normal human. He didn't just dodge. He predicted the attack and used young Bakugo's own momentum against him. For the next several minutes, the building became a deadly playground. Bakugo was the raging minotaur, and Izuku was the ghost in the labyrinth. Bakugo would smash through walls, unleashing furious volleys of explosions that shook the entire structure. I know you're in here, DKU! Show yourself and fight me like a man! But Izuku refused to engage on Bakugo's terms. He used the environment with a chilling mastery. He would appear for a split second in a doorway, only to vanish as Bakugo blew it off its hinges. He would throw a piece of debris down a hallway to draw his fire, then slip past him from the opposite direction. He was a whisper, a shadow, a constant, infuriating presence that Bakugo could never quite pin down. He was systematically dismantling Bakugo's psyche, piece by piece. He was forcing Bakugo to burn through his stamina and the nitroglycerin stores in his gauntlets, all while remaining completely untouched. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, Ida stood ramrod straight beside the papier-mâché bomb, his posture perfect. Bakugo-kun is rash, but his combat abilities are undeniable. He will surely handle Midoriya-kun. My duty is to remain here and guard the objective with unwavering vigilance. He thought, his mind a fortress of logic. Then he heard it. A soft scrape from the air vents above him. He snapped to attention, his engines humming. Who's there? Silence. He scanned the room. As Izuku had predicted, he had cleared the floor of all debris. There was nothing for Uraraka to use. He relaxed slightly. It must have been his imagination, or the sounds of Bakugo's rampage from below. Then, a shadow flickered in the corner of his eye, near the ceiling. He spun around. Nothing. Stay calm, Tenya. Midoriya-kun is occupied. Bakugo-kun confirmed it over the comms with excessive volume. Therefore, it must be Uraraka-san. Her quirk is useless if she cannot touch anything. I have the advantage. A soft thump came from the other side of the room. He whipped his head around, his nerves beginning to fray. The room was empty. But the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Uraraka was playing his mind like a fiddle, her presence a constant, unseen threat that kept him rooted to the spot, just as Izuku had planned. Down on the third floor, the hunt reached its climax. Bakugo was panting now, sweat pouring down his face, his uniform blackened with his own soot. His rage had curdled into a raw, desperate frustration. "Dekawa!" he bellowed, unleashing a massive explosion that blew out an entire section of wall, revealing Izuku standing calmly in the room beyond. This time, Izuku didn't run. He stood his ground, his posture relaxed, his green eyes steady. "You're done running, you bastard!" Bakugo snarled, stalking towards him. "You think you're better than me now? All this fancy footwork, it's just cowardice! You're still the same useless, quirkless Deku you've always been." Izuku remained silent, letting the insults wash over him. He was watching Bakugo's stance, his breathing, the tremor of rage in his hands. He's exhausted his patience. He's preparing for his ultimate move, the large-scale blast from his gauntlets. "Predictable. You've been looking down on me this whole time, haven't you?" Bakugo screamed, his voice raw with a decade of buried insecurity. He raised his right gauntlet, a complex piece of machinery designed to store his nitroglycerin sweat for a massive, focused blast. A pin, shaped like a grenade, was on the side. "I'm going to blast you so hard they'll have to scrape you off the walls. Young Bakugo, no! Stop! You'll kill him!" All Might's voice yelled frantically over the intercom. "He'll be fine if he dodges!" Bakugo yelled back, a manic grin on his face. He pulled the pin. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the mechanism engage, saw the condensed sweat begin to superheat. He had less than a second to react. He could dodge. He could easily evade the blast and continue the charade. That was the logical, safe option. But the mission wasn't just about winning. It was about analysis. And a deeper, more personal objective was now at play. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was an exorcism. Instead of dodging, Izuku did something that no one, not even All Might, could comprehend. He planted his feet. He crossed his arms in front of his face in a reinforced block, the same technique All Might used to brace for impacts. And he took the full force of the blast head-on. The world exploded in fire and thunder. The entire side of the building blew out in a shower of concrete and steel. The control room was in chaos, students screaming in horror. All Might clutched the microphone, his face ashen. "Young Midoriya!" The smoke was thick, acrid. Bakugo stood panting, his arm aching from the recoil, staring into the gaping hole he had created. He expected to see a mangled, broken body. Or nothing at all. As the smoke began to clear, a figure emerged. Izuku was still standing. His costume was shredded, his arms were burned and bleeding, and his face was grim. But he was standing. He had angled his body at the last second, using the initial shockwave to propel him backward, bleeding off the worst of the kinetic energy. He had survived a blast that should have killed him. Bakugo stared, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. "How?" he whispered. "How are you still? It's a powerful quirk, Katsuki," Izuku said, his voice quiet but carrying through the ruined hallway. He lowered his arms, revealing the raw, red burns. He ignored the searing pain. Pain was an old, familiar teacher. "But you're a slave to it. You think it makes you strong, but it's a crutch. It makes you loud, predictable, and vulnerable." That was the breaking point. Bakugo's mind, already frayed from the chase, finally snapped. All his rage, all his confusion, all his fear of this new, incomprehensible Deku coalesced into a single, final, desperate attack. "Shut up!" he screamed, launching himself forward, his left hand sparking for a close-range blast, his right hand drawing back for a punch. Izuku moved. He flowed forward like water, a blur of green and black. He sidestepped the explosion, the heat licking at his side. He deflected the punch with an open palm, redirecting Bakugo's momentum. He spun, moving behind his opponent in a single, fluid motion that seemed to defy physics. He was now behind Bakugo. Untouchable. A ghost. "You telegraph every move with a scream," Izuku whispered, his voice directly behind Bakugo's ear, devoid of all emotion. Bakugo's blood ran cold. He tried to turn, to blast him, but it was too late. Izuku's hands moved with surgical precision. They were not punches or chops. They were strikes. Viper strikes, his instructors had called them. Fast, precise, and aimed at specific nerve clusters. The first strike hit the brachial plexus at the side of Bakugo's neck. A jolt of electricity shot down his right arm, making it go limp and useless. The gauntlet clattered to the floor. The second strike hit the radial nerve in his left arm. Another jolt. His left hand went numb, the sparking dying instantly. His quirk was useless. The third and fourth strikes hit the peroneal nerves on the outside of each knee. His legs buckled, losing all strength. Katsuki Bakugo, the explosive prodigy, the boy who had stood at the pinnacle of their generation since the age of 4, fell to his knees. He was helpless. Not knocked out, not beaten unconscious. He was systematically, clinically, and completely disabled. He could still think, still feel, still burn with impotent rage, but his body would not obey him. Izuku stood over him, his shadow falling across Bakugo's kneeling form. This is the difference between us, Katsuki. You have power. I have control. He didn't spare him a second glance. He placed a hand to his earpiece. Uraraka. The Pomeranian is caged. What's your status? Upstairs, Ida heard the massive explosion and the subsequent, terrifying silence. Bakugo-kun? Bakugo-kun, respond! What is your status? Only Static answered. The silence was more unnerving than the fighting. Just as his anxiety reached its peak, Uraraka made her move. A huge concrete pillar from the floor below, one that had been damaged in Bakugo's rampage, suddenly shot up through the floorboards. Ida yelped in surprise. It wasn't aimed at him, but it provided the perfect distraction. As he stared at the impossible sight, Uraraka, who had been hiding on the ceiling above the doorway the entire time, released her quirk on herself, and dropped down behind him. I've got you! She yelled, lunging for the bomb. Ida spun, his engines firing, moving to intercept her. But Uraraka wasn't aiming for the bomb anymore. She was aiming for the pillar. She slapped it with her hand. Release! The massive chunk of concrete, now subject to gravity again, began to fall. But before it did, she used its momentary weightlessness to swing it like a colossal bat. It wasn't an attack, it was a distraction, an area denial weapon. Comet home run! She screamed. The pillar swung through the air, sending thousands of tiny pebbles and debris flying everywhere. Ida was forced to shield his face, and in that moment Uraraka used her quirk on the tiny rocks, creating a cloud of weightless projectiles. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for. It was the opportunity Izuku had told her to create. As Ida was blinded and disoriented, Izuku appeared in the doorway. He had scaled the outside of the building in the time it took Uraraka to launch her attack. He moved through the floating debris like a phantom. He didn't touch Ida. He didn't need to. He ran past him, vaulted over the bomb, and in a single, fluid motion, slapped the roll of capture tape across his back. Villain captured, Izuku stated, his voice calm. A moment later, Uraraka touched the bomb. Hero team wins! She cheered before collapsing to her knees, looking distinctly nauseous. The exercise was over. The observation room was as silent as a tomb. The students stared at the screens, their minds struggling to reconcile the boy they thought they knew with the terrifyingly efficient warrior they had just witnessed. They had expected a beatdown, a slaughter. And they had gotten one, but the roles of predator and prey had been reversed in the most brutal way imaginable. Bakugo was escorted to the nurse's office, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of the nerve strikes, his eyes staring blankly at nothing. His pride, his worldview, his very identity had been systematically dismantled and left in ruins. When Izuku and Uraraka returned to the control room, the other students parted for them, creating a wide berth. They looked at Izuku with a new emotion, fear. All Might met them, his face a grim mask. He gave Uraraka a thumbs up. Excellent teamwork and a creative strategy, young Uraraka. You were the MVP of this match. He then turned to Izuku, his voice dropping. Young Midoriya. A word. In private, he led Izuku to an empty observation lounge. The hero's signature smile was gone, replaced by a look of deep, profound concern. That was a flawless victory. All Might began, his voice heavy. Too flawless. Your tactics, your precision, your ruthlessness. That was not the work of a student. That was the work of a soldier. He looked at Izuku, his blue eyes searching for an answer. The way you dismantled young Bakugo, you didn't just defeat him. You humiliated him. You broke him. There was no heroism in that, my boy, only cold, brutal efficiency. Where did you learn to fight like that? It was the second time in 2 days he had been asked that question. Aizawa's suspicion was one thing. But this was All Might. The man Izuku had once worshipped. The symbol he was sent here to dissect. Izuku met his gaze, his face an unreadable mask. When you're quirkless, All Might, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You don't have the luxury of pulling your punches. You learn to end a fight before it begins. You learn that survival is more important than pride. He touched his still healing arm. He was going to kill me. I did what was necessary to neutralize the threat. The answer was logical. It was sound. But it felt hollow, even to Izuku. All Might stared at him for a long moment, a storm of conflicting emotions behind his eyes. He saw the boy who had recklessly saved young Uraraka in the entrance exam, and he saw the cold, detached warrior who had just shattered his classmate's spirit without a flicker of remorse. He couldn't reconcile the two. Victory at any cost is not the way of a hero, young Midoriya, he said softly. Remember that. He turned and left, leaving Izuku alone in the empty room, the city-sized battlefield reflected in the glass before him. He had won the battle. He had protected his partner. He had perfectly executed his strategy. But as he looked at his own reflection, at the cold, calculating eyes staring back at him, a sliver of doubt, sharp and cold as his grandfather's dagger, pierced through his armor of discipline. He had won. But had he lost something far more important in the process? The day after the battle trial, a palpable tension clung to Class 1A like the morning mist. The students, once a boisterous and confident collective, were now subdued, casting furtive glances at the two figures at the heart of the previous day's storm. Bakugo was a thundercloud of simmering rage and wounded pride, hunched in his seat, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. His explosive temper had been replaced by a brooding, volatile silence that was somehow more intimidating. Izuku, on the other hand, was an island of unnerving calm. He sat at his desk, his posture perfect, his expression serene as he read a book on advanced tactical theory. He seemed utterly unaffected by the whispers that followed him, the fearful looks from his classmates, or the suffocating animosity radiating from the desk behind him. To the outside world, he was the victor, composed and in control. Inside, however, a quiet war was being waged. The battle trial had been a tactical success but a strategic complication. He had established his capabilities, a necessary step, but he had done so with a brutality that shattered his carefully constructed camouflage of a hard-working quirkless kid. He was no longer just a surprising rookie, he was a dangerous anomaly. Aizawa's scrutiny had intensified, All Might's trust was shaken, and his peers now treated him with a cautious fear that was antithetical to forming the bonds his mission required for close observation. At lunchtime, the cafeteria was a cacophony of chatter and clattering trays. Izuku sat alone at a small table in the corner, eating a nutritionally balanced meal with methodical precision. It was how he preferred it. Solitude was safe. Solitude was familiar. Midoriya-kun? Is this seat taken? He looked up. Uraraka stood before him, her lunch tray held in both hands, a nervous but determined smile on her face. Beside her, Ida stood rigidly, his own tray held with the posture of a royal guardsman presenting a sacred artifact. Izuku's training screamed at him. Isolate. Observe. Do not engage. Attachments are a liability. But his mission parameters were in conflict. Integrate. Gather intelligence. Blend in. He was supposed to be a student, and students ate lunch with their peers. Rejecting them now would only deepen their suspicion. He gave a slight nod. It is not. Uraraka's smile widened as she sat down, followed by Ida. The immediate shift in the cafeteria's atmosphere was noticeable. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. The quirkless prodigy was fraternizing. Your movements yesterday were incredible, Deku-kun. Uraraka began, trying to break the awkward silence. I mean, a little scary, but amazing. The way you just knew what Bakugo-kun was going to do before he did it. It was like you were from the future. Indeed, Ida added, his hand chopping the air for emphasis. Your strategic acumen and combat prowess are of the highest caliber. While I cannot condone the excessive force used to neutralize a classmate, your efficiency was undeniable. You must share your training regimen with me sometime. Izuku took a sip of water, using the moment to formulate a response that was both placating and vague. It is simply a matter of pattern recognition, he said, his voice even. All fighters have habits, tells. Bakugos are just louder than most. I simply observed and reacted. They continued to talk, mostly about trivial things, the difficulty of present mixed English class, the surprisingly delicious katsudon in the cafeteria, theories about what their hero costumes would look like. Izuku remained mostly silent, offering short, non-committal answers when directly addressed. But he was listening, and for the first time in a very, very long time, he was experiencing something profoundly alien, uncomplicated human interaction. There were no ulterior motives in Uraraka's cheerful questions, no hidden tests in Ida's rigid pronouncements. It was just friendship. The concept was a foreign data point, something he had read about in books but never experienced. It was warm. It was genuine, and it was terrifying. This warmth was a distraction. This ease was a vulnerability. Every pleasant moment he spent with them was a grain of sand in the gears of the perfect machine his grandfather had built. He felt a strange, unsettling flicker of enjoyment, a quiet pleasure in their company that he had to consciously and forcefully suppress. He was a weapon, an instrument of his grandfather's will. Weapons did not have friends. He excused himself from the table as soon as he finished his meal, leaving a slightly confused Uraraka and Ida in his wake. He needed to recenter, to purge this nascent sentimentality. The whispers from Nanda Parbat were growing louder in his mind, reminding him of his true purpose. That evening, Izuku returned not to the small apartment his mother rented, but to a different location. A high-end, anonymous corporate suite in a skyscraper in the heart of Mizurufu, paid for by a shell corporation with ties to the League. It was his true base of operations, sterile, secure, and untraceable. His mother, Inko, or as he knew her, Talia, lived in the apartment as part of his cover, a civilian anchor to his fabricated history. He only visited it occasionally to maintain appearances. The suite was Spartan. A single futon, a low table, and a wall of monitors displaying everything from local news feeds to encrypted satellite data. This was his sanctuary, his real home. It was as cold and impersonal as the stone cells of Nanda Parbat. He sat Saiza on a meditation mat in the center of the room, the city lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars through the floor-to-ceiling window. He regulated his breathing, sinking into a deep meditative state, attempting to purge the day's emotional contamination. He focused on the League's mantras, the cold philosophies that had been hammered into his soul since he was 6 years old. Emotion is a flaw in the design. Compassion is a poison. Victory is the only moral imperative. A soft chime, almost inaudible to a normal human ear, echoed through the room. It was the signal. His scheduled communication window was open. He rose and moved to a sleek black terminal. He placed his palm on a scanner. A series of biometric checks ran: retina, voice print, heartbeat rhythm. The system was impenetrable. After a moment, the screen flickered to life, not with a video feed, but with a cascading wall of emerald green code. Encrypted, untraceable, bouncing between a dozen hidden servers across the globe. A text field appeared. DH report. The letters were stark, demanding. DH. The demon's head. Raz al Ghul. Izuku's fingers flew across the keyboard, his movements precise and economical. He typed with the speed of a court stenographer, his report a model of efficiency. Air infiltration successful. Enrolled in Class 1A. Initial assessment of peers and faculty complete. Primary target, All Might, is an instructor. Proximity achieved. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keys. Now came the difficult part. The justification for his actions during the battle trial. He had to frame it in a way his grandfather would understand and approve of. Heir engaged in combat simulation. Target: Katsuki Bakugo, subject with high-level explosive quirk and pre-existing hostility. Subject's psychological instability deemed a tactical vulnerability. Exploited ego to provoke overt aggression. Neutralized subject with non-lethal nerve strikes. Objective: establish credibility and superiority to discourage future challenges and facilitate covert observation. It was a carefully worded fabrication. While true on a tactical level, it completely omitted the core, emotional reason for his calculated dismantling of Bakugo. It omitted the decade of pain and the deep, buried need to prove that Deku was not useless. That omission felt like a betrayal, both of himself and of the cold honesty the League demanded. A new line of text appeared from his grandfather, non-lethal. A curious choice. Izuku's heart rate increased by a single beat per minute. A test. His grandfather was always testing him. A lethal force would have compromised the mission. Expulsion was a certainty. My continued presence within UA is paramount. The logic was sound. Flawless, even. There was a long pause. Izuku waited, his eyes fixed on the screen, his breathing perfectly controlled. He could almost feel his grandfather's ancient, analytical gaze boring into him from thousands of miles away. Finally, a new message appeared. But it wasn't text. It was an audio file. Izuku clicked it. His grandfather's voice filled the silent room. It was not the voice of a man, but of an epic. Smooth as polished jade, cold as a tomb. Your logic is sound, my heir. For now. You have established yourself as a predator among sheep. This is acceptable. There was a pause, filled with an unspoken weight. But I have reviewed the recordings of your trial. Your movements were flawless. Your strategy impeccable. Yet I sense a hesitation. A sentimentality you have yet to purge. I see you interacting with the other insects. The girl with the gravity manipulation. The boy with the engine legs. The voice grew colder, sharper. Remember your purpose, Izuku. You are not there to make friends. You are there to dissect a failed system. These children, these so-called heroes, they are nothing. They are instruments for your education, tools for your analysis, and ultimately obstacles to be removed when the time is right. Do not mistake your specimens for your equals. Attachment is a cancer. It will rot you from the inside and lead to your destruction. I have seen it happen before. The unspoken reference hung in the air. Talia. Your mother. All Might and his ilk offer a comforting lie. Raz continued. They preach salvation through strength, but they only treat the symptoms of a diseased world. They are garish janitors, mopping up spills while the foundation rots away. We are the surgeons. We cut out the disease, cauterize the wound, and restore balance. It is a painful, thankless task, but it is necessary. It is our burden. It is your destiny. The audio file ended. The screen went blank, the connection severed. Izuku remained motionless for a long time, the words echoing in the sterile quiet of the suite. Insects. Specimens. Tools. The words clashed violently with the memory of Uraraka's bright, genuine smile, with Ida's earnest, unwavering respect. His grandfather's philosophy was a fortress, built brick by brick over 9 years of relentless indoctrination. It was logical. It was absolute. And until recently it had been impenetrable. But now, tiny cracks were beginning to show. The simple, uncomplicated kindness of his classmates was like a persistent vine, probing for purchase, threatening the very foundations of his identity. Which path was right? The surgeon's cold, merciless scalpel, or the hero's comforting, perhaps futile, hand? Could there be a balance? Or was he doomed to choose one and betray the other? He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. Doubt was a luxury he could not afford. He had a mission. He had a purpose. He returned to the meditation mat, forcing his mind back to the familiar, cold certainty of his training. He would not fail. He would not falter. He would be the perfect heir. The next day, All Might announced that their foundational heroics class would be held off campus. They were going to a special training facility, the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. The bus ride was a loud, boisterous affair. His classmates, having seemingly moved past the shock of the battle trial, were back to their usual selves. Tsuyu Ajui, the frog-like girl, started a blunt but honest conversation about their quirks. "Midoriya-chan," she said, her voice a placid croak. "Your performance in the test was amazing, but you got really beaten up in the battle trial. It seems like you have a very powerful, but very self-destructive quirk." The entire bus went quiet. The misconception was a useful one. Izuku had allowed the faculty to believe his physical prowess was some kind of self-enhancement quirk that caused massive recall, a story that fit the narrative of his burned arms after Bakugo's blast. It was a lie that provided cover for his quirkless status. "It's something I'm still learning to control," Izuku replied, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. It was a perfect deflection, one that earned him sympathetic looks rather than suspicious ones. As they arrived at the massive domed facility, they were greeted by the Space Hero, 13. The Pro Hero began to explain the purpose of the USJ, to train them to use their quirks for rescue and salvation, not for fighting. "A quirk can be a tool to save lives," 13 said, their voice filtered through their helmet. "But it can also, with a single mistake, be a tool to kill. This facility will teach you the difference." As 13 was speaking, Izuku felt it. A subtle shift in the air. A faint hum of electricity that was out of place. His senses, honed to a razor's edge, screamed that something was wrong. His eyes darted to the central plaza below them. For a split second, the fountain flickered, the water distorting, and then, a swirling vortex of dark purple mist erupted in the center of the plaza. It was a wound in the fabric of reality, a gateway to somewhere dark. Aizawa spun around, his posture instantly shifting from lazy teacher to apex predator. 13. Protect the students. Everyone, stay back. This is real. From the dark portal, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. Hundreds. A motley, grotesque army of street thugs and low-life villains, their eyes wild with malice. And at their lead were three figures. A hulking, bird-like creature with an exposed brain, its muscles bulging unnaturally. A man made of the same purple mist as the portal, and a man covered in disembodied hands, his posture hunched, his visible skin dry and cracked. He scratched furiously at his neck, his red eyes burning with a childish, terrifying madness. The schedule said All Might was supposed to be here, the man with the hands rasped, his voice like grinding sand. Someone must have messed up. Oh well. I wonder if he'll show up if we kill a few kids. This was it. An unforeseen variable. An unscheduled test. Izuku's mind, which should have been reeling with the same fear and panic as his classmates, instead went into a state of ice-cold clarity. The world slowed down. The chaotic scene below was no longer a terrifying invasion. It was a tactical problem. Enemy numbers, approximately 70 to 80. Mostly low-level combatants. 3 primary command units. The warp gate user is the key to their mobility and escape. The large creature is likely their heavy assault unit, their boss. The hand-covered individual is the leader. Objective: neutralize leader and warp gate user. Failing that, protect civilian assets, classmates, and secure a route for communication and extraction. Aizawa didn't hesitate. He leaped from the stairs, his capture weapon flying, his eyes glowing red. He was a whirlwind of motion, disabling villains with a terrifying efficiency that made Izuku's own combat style look like a pale imitation. This is no time to be standing around, Ida yelled. We must evacuate, but it was too late. The purple mist, the warp gate villain known as Kurojiri, appeared before them, a pair of glowing yellow eyes in a swirling vortex. I'm sorry, but I can't allow that. My duty is to scatter you, and torture you to death. The world became a blur of purple darkness. Izuku felt a powerful, disorienting pull, and then he was falling. He twisted in midair, landing in a silent crouch in shin-deep water. He was in the shipwreck zone of the USJ, along with Tsuyu and a terrified, weeping Mineta. They were surrounded. A dozen villains with aquatic quirks rose from the water, leering at them, their intentions predatory. Look what we got, one of them, a man with a shark-like head, grinned. A couple of kids. This is gonna be easy. Tsuyu looked at Izuku, her wide eyes filled with fear. Mineta was already sobbing, convinced they were going to die. The voice of Raz al Ghul whispered in Izuku's ear. Observe their weaknesses. Let them perish if necessary. Your survival is paramount. But then he saw the look on Tsuyu's face. The genuine terror. The same terror he had seen on Uraraka's face during the entrance exam. He made a choice. Ajiri-san, Izuku said, his voice shockingly calm. What are the specifics of your quirk, Kero? I can do pretty much anything a frog can, she answered, startled by his composure. Stick to walls, extend my tongue up to 20 meters, secrete a mild paralytic toxin. Mineta, Izuku continued, not even glancing at the small, crying boy. Those spheres on your head. What do they do? They're super sticky. Mineta wailed. They stick to anything but me. But they'll start to make my head bleed if I pull too many off. Izuku's mind processed the information in a nanosecond. Perfect. He looked at the villains closing in. He looked at the massive ship in the center of the zone. A plan, born of brutal tactical necessity and a flicker of something heroic, bloomed in his mind. Here's what we're going to do, he said, his green eyes glowing with a cold, analytical light that was more frightening than any of the villains' sneers. One of the villains lunged. But Izuku was already moving. He was a green blur across the water's surface, his feet barely seeming to touch it. He met the villain not with a punch, but with a precise, disabling strike to the gills. The villain choked and collapsed. The others paused, shocked. Who the hell is this kid? Izuku didn't give them time to recover. He moved among them like a phantom, his tonfas a blur, striking nerves and joints, disabling his opponents with a ruthless efficiency that was beautiful and terrifying to behold. He wasn't a hero in training. He was a predator in his natural element. He had just begun to fight. And the League of Villains had no idea what kind of demon they had just unleashed. The water in the shipwreck zone was murky and cold, but Izuku's mind was a furnace of searingly hot, clear thought. Panic was a luxury, fear a chemical reaction to be controlled. The terrified cries of Mineta and the worried croaks of Tsuyu were auditory data points, variables in a rapidly evolving tactical equation. The dozen aquatic villains closing in were not monsters. They were obstacles, each with a unique set of weaknesses waiting to be exploited. Stay close and do exactly as I say, Izuku commanded, his voice devoid of tremor. It was the voice of an instructor, not a peer. It cut through the terrified haze in the other students' minds, giving them a focal point. The shark-headed villain sneered, recovering from the shock of seeing his comrade fall. Big words for a little brat. There are 12 of us and 3 of you. Get him! They surged forward, churning the water into a frenzy. It was the classic mistake of the undisciplined, a blind, overwhelming assault. They assumed numerical superiority was a substitute for strategy. Izuku moved. He was a phantom gliding across the surface of the water, a technique that involved precise foot placement to take advantage of the water's surface tension for a split second. It looked like a miracle. It was pure physics and inhuman agility. Ajiri-san, left flank! Your tongue, aim for their eyes and breathing orifices. Disorient them, Izuku ordered without looking at her. Tsuyu, startled into action by his command, reacted on instinct. Her long, sticky tongue shot out, wrapping around the face of a villain with a squid-like quirk, blinding him. He thrashed wildly, ink clouding the water. Mineta, the ship's hull! Give me a 20-foot-wide adhesive field, now! We're going to die! Mineta shrieked, but his hands were already moving, plucking the purple, sticky spheres from his head and flinging them wildly toward the massive ship that dominated the artificial lake. The spheres splattered against the rusted metal, creating a wide, impassable trap. Izuku engaged the main group. He was not a brawler. He was a surgeon. He flowed between the villains, a whisper of motion. His tonfas were extensions of his arms, striking with pinpoint accuracy. A blow to a gill slit here, a nerve cluster behind a fin there, a disabling strike to a joint. He never used more force than was necessary. Each movement was a study in brutal economy. The villains were clumsy, powerful, and utterly outmatched. They were trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. In under 30 seconds, half of them were floating unconscious or writhing in the water, their limbs refusing to obey them. The remaining villains hesitated, their bravado evaporating, replaced by a primal fear. This wasn't a student. This was a monster. He's taking them all down. Suyu whispered from her position, her tongue having already disabled a second villain. Izuku used their hesitation. He leaped from the water, landing silently on the ship's railing. The rest of you have two options, he said, his voice calm and cold as it echoed across the water. Surrender now, or I will be forced to employ more permanent methods of incapacitation. Your choice. There was no boast in his tone. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the chilling certainty of a man who had considered and was fully capable of both options. The remaining villains, seeing their comrades floating helplessly, made the logical choice. They raised their hands in surrender. Izuku didn't relax. He produced a high-tensile wire from his utility belt and, with a few deft movements, had them bound together. He then turned his attention back to his classmates. Mineta was staring at him, his mouth agape, tears and snot still streaking his face. Suyu was looking at him with a mixture of awe and something akin to fear. Are you both unharmed? Izuku asked, his tone shifting from commander back to concerned student, the transition seamless and slightly unsettling. Kero. Yes. We're fine. Suyu managed. Midoriya-chan, that was incredible. But how did you, later? Izuku cut her off, his eyes already scanning the rest of the USJ. His hearing, trained to pick up the sound of a falling leaf in a silent forest, focused on the cacophony of battle echoing from the central plaza. Aizawa-sensei is in trouble. He's fighting too many at once. His quirk works best in stealth and one-on-one encounters. Against a mob, he's at a disadvantage. Every time he blinks, his opponents get their quirks back. He was right. From their vantage point, they could see their teacher, a black-clad dervish in the center of a swarm, fighting with a desperate, beautiful ferocity. But he was slowing down. His movements were becoming less fluid. He was being worn down. We need to help him, Suyu said, her expression firming with resolve. No, Izuku stated flatly. Our intervention would be tactically insignificant. We are outmatched by their command units. We need to reassess the primary objective, escape and communication. Ida is our best chance. He was likely teleported near the entrance with the others. We need to believe he has or will escape to get help. So we just sit here and do nothing? Mineta wailed. We do not sit. We observe. Izuku corrected, his gaze fixed on the central plaza, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. He was watching the villains' movements, their attack patterns, their command structure, and he was watching the three leaders. The warp gate, Kurojiri, was containing the students. The handman, Shigaraki, was observing, scratching his neck with a twitchy, manic energy, and the hulking beast, the Nomu, stood beside him, unnervingly still. A living weapon, waiting to be deployed? His eyes narrowed as he saw it. Shigaraki gestured, and the Nomu moved. It was a blur, faster than anything Izuku had ever seen, faster even than All Might in the videos. It appeared behind Aizawa, who was in the middle of disabling another villain. Their teacher didn't even have time to react. The Nomu's massive hand grabbed his head and slammed it into the concrete with a sickening crunch. A collective gasp went through the students watching from the various zones. The Nomu was not done. It grabbed Aizawa's arm, twisting it. A wet snap echoed across the plaza. It twisted the other. Another snap. Aizawa cried out, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. This is your great hero? Shigaraki's raspy voice mocked, full of childish glee. He's so weak. And you, Eraserhead? How disappointing. You can erase quirks, but you can't erase the difference in raw power. He gestured again. The Nomu raised Aizawa's broken body and slammed it down again, the impact echoing like a gunshot. Izuku felt a cold, primal rage building in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. It was not the righteous anger of a hero, it was the possessive fury of a commander watching one of his own being torn apart. Aizawa was an asset. A valuable one. And he was being destroyed. We have to do something. Suyu croaked, tears welling in her eyes. Mineta was just a ball of incoherent sobbing. This time, Izuku agreed. Not out of heroism, but out of cold, tactical necessity. Aizawa was the first line of defense. If he fell, the students were next. Shigaraki had to be stopped. "Stay here," Izuku said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Do not move from this ship." Before they could protest, he was gone. He dove into the water, a silent green streak. He didn't swim on the surface. He swam beneath it, using a specialized breathing technique that allowed him to hold his breath for over 10 minutes. He was a torpedo of silent fury, closing the distance to the central plaza undetected. He surfaced behind the fountain, a ghost rising from the water. He watched as Shigaraki gloated over Aizawa's broken form. "Noma," Shigaraki said, his voice bored. "Finish him." The creature raised a massive fist to deliver the final, crushing blow. "No!" Izuku exploded from his cover. He knew he couldn't fight the Noma. He couldn't even scratch it. But he could fight its master. He moved with a speed that defied belief, closing the 50-meter distance in seconds. Shigaraki, his attention completely focused on Aizawa's impending death, didn't notice him until it was too late. Kurogiri, the warp gate, tried to intercept, but Izuku threw a trio of razor-sharp discs, not at Kurogiri's body, but at the metal brace around his neck, the only solid part of him. The impacts were minor, but they were unexpected, forcing the mist villain to recoil for a precious half-second. That was all the time Izuku needed. He didn't aim a punch at Shigaraki. He knew from observation that the villain's quirk, decay, was likely touch-based. Instead, he launched a powerful sweep kick aimed at Shigaraki's legs. His shin connected, and Shigaraki yelped, tumbling to the ground, his attack on Aizawa forgotten. The Nomu, its order incomplete, paused, its bird-like head tilting in confusion. Izuku didn't press the attack. He scooped up Aizawa's unconscious, bleeding form and leaped backward, putting distance between them and the villains. He landed beside Tsuyu and Mineta, who had disobeyed his orders and made their way to the edge of the water. "Get him to safety," Izuku snarled, gently laying their teacher down. Shigaraki picked himself up, brushing dust from his clothes. He wasn't angry. He was intrigued. He tilted his head, his red eyes zeroing in on Izuku. Well, what do we have here?" "A little hero, rushing in to save the day." "You're fast." But that was a bad move. He started scratching his neck furiously. "A very bad move. You just ruined the final boss event." He looked at Izuku, his gaze analytical. "But you're interesting. You didn't use a quirk just now. And your movements, they're too clean. Too perfect." "Who are you?" Izuku said nothing. He stood between the villains and his classmates, his body a shield. His mind was racing, analyzing the Noma. Incredible speed and strength. No visible reaction to pain when it was fighting Aizawa. Likely possesses some form of shock absorption or nullification. The exposed brain is a design flaw. A potential weakness? Possibly a control node or its only vulnerable point. No answer? Shigaraki chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Fine. Let's see how you handle this. Noma. Kill him," the Noma charged. It was an unstoppable force of nature, a freight train of muscle and bone. The ground shook with its steps. Tsuyu screamed. Izuku braced himself. He knew he couldn't dodge. He couldn't block. This was it. Boom! The main doors of the USJ were blown off their hinges, reduced to shrapnel. A massive figure stood silhouetted in the smoke and dust, his iconic two tufts of hair unmistakable. "Have no fear," a voice boomed, a sound that was pure hope and righteous fury. "For I am here." All Might had arrived. But he wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying rage. Shigaraki's posture changed instantly. The childish annoyance was gone, replaced by a giddy, manic excitement. The final boss has appeared. And just after a continued 2, we've been waiting for you, All Might. All Might was a blur. He moved faster than Izuku's trained eyes could fully track, appearing in an instant, scooping up Aizawa and the 3 students, and depositing them near the entrance in the blink of an eye. "Take Aizawa-kun to safety," he ordered Izuku, his voice a low growl. "I'll handle this." He turned to face the villains, his massive frame radiating an almost unbearable pressure. The low-level thugs, who had been held at bay by Aizawa, took one look at the enraged symbol of peace and collectively took a step back. So, All Might said, his eyes locked on Shigaraki. You're the ones responsible for this cowardly attack. Cowardly? Shigaraki giggled. I think you'll find we're quite brave. Especially since we brought a playmate for you. He gestured to the Noma. This is the anti-symbol of peace, the bioengineered Noma. It was created specifically to kill you. Nomu attack. The two titans clashed. The impact was a sonic boom. A shockwave of pure force erupted from the point of impact, kicking up a hurricane of wind and dust that sent the students staggering. The fight was on a scale that defied comprehension. It was a battle of gods, their fists moving so fast they were invisible, each blow a clap of thunder. Izuku watched, his analytical mind firing on all cylinders, overriding the awe that threatened to consume him. He wasn't watching a hero fight a monster. He was analyzing his primary target in a live combat scenario. All Might's power is astronomical. His blows carry enough kinetic force to alter the weather. But he's being matched. The Nomu isn't just durable, it has a quirk. Shock absorption. It's negating the kinetic energy of his punches. He's fighting at 100%, but it's having no effect. He saw All Might land a thunderous blow to the Nomu's head that should have turned it to paste. The creature's head bent back at an impossible angle, but it didn't break. It absorbed the impact. You see, All Might? Shigaraki's voice called out over the din. My Nomu's quirk is shock absorption. He can take any of your pathetic punches. The only way you can hurt him is to slowly gouge out his flesh, but I doubt you have the time for that before he crushes you. As if to prove his point, the Nomu's arms shot out, its massive fingers digging into All Might's sides. All Might grunted in pain, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. The students gasped. The invincible hero was bleeding. Kurogiri appeared, opening a warp gate beneath All Might's feet and another behind the Noma. The creature's fists plunged into the portal, reappearing behind All Might to pummel his back. It was a perfect, inescapable pincer attack. This is it, All Might! The end of your reign! Shigaraki cackled. Izuku's mind raced. The shock absorption is the problem. It negates kinetic impacts. But what about its regeneration? Aizawa tried to erase its quirk, but it still moved, so its strength is a physical attribute. But it must have another quirk. Super regeneration. That's how it recovered from Aizawa's attacks. Multiple quirks. Illegal. Genetically engineered. He watched All Might struggle, his seemingly limitless strength failing against an opponent designed to be his perfect counter. The symbol of peace was losing, and then Izuku saw it. An opening. The exposed brain. It was a constant. A design feature. Why? Why leave the most vital organ exposed? It wasn't a weakness. It was a clue. It was the key. The brain is the control center. But it must also be the weak point for the regeneration quirk. The regeneration heals the body, but what happens if the body is frozen? Or burned? Regeneration requires cellular activity. Extreme temperatures could inhibit it. Suddenly, everything clicked. The pieces fell into place. He saw the path to victory. A desperate, insane path, but a path nonetheless. Just then, Bakugo and Kirishima arrived, launching a desperate attack on Kurogiri. Todoroki followed moments later, a wave of ice freezing the Nomu's right side, giving All Might a momentary reprieve. Get back, all of you! All Might roared, pushing himself free. This is out of your league. We're not just going to stand by and watch you die. Kirishima yelled, hardening his arms. Shigaraki laughed. More party guests! How fun! Nomu, kill the explosive child first. He's annoying. The Nomu, its right side frozen solid, turned its attention to Bakugo. All Might! Izuku screamed, his voice cutting through the chaos. He had to convey a decade of tactical analysis in a single sentence. The brain. It's the weak point. Its body can absorb impact, but its limbs can't. You can immobilize it. Todoroki's ice. Bakugo's explosions. Extreme temperatures. It can't regenerate what's been frozen or burned to ash. All Might's eyes widened. Todoroki and Bakugo looked at Izuku in shock. Shigaraki's scratching stopped. How? The villain whispered. How could you know that? All Might saw it. The flicker of hope. The strategy. He looked at the students who had rushed to his side. He looked at Izuku, whose eyes burned with a terrifying, brilliant intensity. He saw not children, but fellow heroes. A sound plan, young Midoriya! All Might boomed, a true, brilliant smile finally returning to his face. He planted his feet. Now all of you, get ready! He charged the Nomu, not with a straight punch, but with a suplex, driving the creature headfirst into the concrete with enough force to crack the entire plaza. He pinned it, his massive arms locking its body in place. Now! He roared. Todoroki unleashed a massive glacier, encasing the Nomu's left side completely in ice. Bakugo flew in, placing his gauntlets on its exposed back, unleashing a continuous, searing explosion. Ice and fire. The two extremes. The Nomu shrieked, a high-pitched, unearthly sound. For the first time, it was feeling pain. Its regeneration was struggling, unable to cope with the cellular destruction caused by the dual elemental assault. You think this is enough to defeat him? Shigaraki screamed in a panic. He was made to kill you! You're right! All Might roared, his muscles bulging, steam beginning to pour off his body. This isn't enough. For a hero must always be ready to push past their limits. He began to punch. He held the Nomu in place with one arm and punched its trapped, frozen, burning body with the other. Each punch was faster, stronger than the last. They were not just punches, they were statements. You may have been made to counter me, but I am a hero. We are not so easily defeated. He threw another 100 punches in a matter of seconds, his fists a blur. Now for a lesson. You may have heard these words before, but I'll teach you what they really mean. He drew back his arm, all of his remaining power coalescing into a single point. Go beyond! Plus Ultra! The final punch connected. It was not aimed at the Nomu's shock-absorbent torso. It was aimed at the plaza beneath the Nomu. The blow shattered the sound barrier. The ground erupted. The Nomu, its body already weakened, was caught in the epicenter of an explosion of pure kinetic force. It was launched like a cannonball, straight up, smashing through the massive dome of the USJ and disappearing into the sky as a tiny, twinkling star. Silence. The battle was over. All Might stood, steam pouring off his body, his form flickering. He was at his limit. Shigaraki stared at the hole in the ceiling, his body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. He cheated. He used a cheat code. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. The faculty had arrived. Shigaraki and Kyojiri, realizing the game was over, vanished into a warp gate, but not before Shigaraki cast one last, burning look at the boy who had unraveled his entire plan, the quirkless kid. The unforeseen variable. As the pro-heroes secured the area and the students were accounted for, Izuku stood quietly to the side, his mind replaying the entire battle. He had provided the key to victory. He had saved All Might. He had acted like a hero. The feeling was intoxicating. And it was a complete and utter betrayal of his mission. He had not analyzed All Might's weaknesses to report them. He had analyzed them to save him. The whispers from Nanda Parbat in his mind were no longer whispers. They were a screaming, accusatory chorus. And for the first time, Izuku Midoriya did not know if he had the strength to listen.